Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. I'm one of your hosts. Good to be here. I'm here with my esteemed colleagues, Leb Tannenbaum. Leb, how are you, sir?
Hi, very good, very good.
Good. Welcome back. And we are joined by our typical partner in crime, Patsy Feeman. Hello, Patsy.
Hey, Patrick, Leb, Desh. I didn't know I could be so curious about data, so I'm looking forward to this podcast.
I know today. So yes, so the episode, today's episode is called "Data as a Strategic Asset," and to help us cover today's topic, we've brought on Desh Urs. Desh is the CEO and president of iBridge. Desh's experience in technology spans more than 3 decades, beginning with a distinguished career in some of the largest global technology companies, and then culminating in the founding of iBridge in 2004. Now, since 2004, iBridge has helped organizations in legal and healthcare, manufacturing, utilities, financial, education, and government all apply the latest technology to support growth and increase profitability. Primarily, iBridge offers a variety of services from InfoSec, cloud, mobility, process consulting, process outsourcing, data harmonization, forensic analysis, a lot of different topics that we're going to get into today, all for you, the listener, so that you can figure out how can you utilize data more as a strategic asset. So Desh Urs, welcome to the Frustrated CEO podcast.
Good to be here, Patrick. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thanks for agreeing to come on. So Desh, first question right out of the gate. How can you tell the difference between a business problem and a data problem? What is the difference, and why is it significant to know the difference?
So most business problems, the root of those problems are data problems. Whether you look at it from the customer side, you look at it from your internal supply chain, your suppliers, your employees, you just name it, everything sort of is around data. Data is a lifeblood of an enterprise. So if you look at a business problem today that all of us are tackling, is the conversation about finding and retaining good people. And whether you are running a restaurant or a chain of restaurants or a factory or whatever you're doing, right? Most of the times we are trying to fill positions and functions. What we forget behind that positions and functions is the quality of data that supports those positions and functions. By that I mean there's an ideal profile of a function and of a position. We don't tend to marry them. We tend to find bodies and throw the best qualified bodies at that without understanding what the cultural setup is the person is coming from, the culture of my company, the actual function, and what is the ideal profile by region, by location, by this and by that, because it varies, right? It varies from, 20 miles from one city, 20 miles to another city, right? And so the question comes up is that how do I even address that issue if I don't begin looking at the data? And there are many ways that you can look at that data, but that is one example, right? And there are a myriad of examples. Right? And one that I love to give to people is that, think about what Uber has been attacking, right? Who is the customer? Is it the rideshare or is it the driver? And it's a complex problem, right? I mean, who's your customer? And so the only way that you can understand your customer is to look at the data behind that customer.
So thank you. I just think about the evolution of data, it seemed like there was a period of time, especially when there were divergent systems and data was kept in hard copy, and it seemed like CEOs or business leaders couldn't get access to enough data. Now it feels like there's so much data. How do you weed through? How do you discern the noise, or the wheat from the chaff? How do you separate it? How do you identify from all this info? How do you get good at distilling all of them through all the noise to find the most relevant, pertinent information? And does it vary by business?
It's so interesting you use those words, because there used to be a newsletter that iBridge used to put out called Distilling the Noise. And it was so interesting because it brings back memories when we used to put that out, because the challenge with data, as you correctly said, there's just too much of it today. And we are all forced to look at our phones, our devices, or whatever we're doing all the time, right? It's not uncommon that you tap your teenager at the dining table and say, put down that phone.
Yeah.
And you do the same thing 2 minutes later, right? I mean, so it is like, okay. Question is, how do we divide that space up to useful data and good to have data and just junk, right? And it depends it depends on who you are, what you do, and which function you have in the enterprise, right? So imagine that as a CEO of a company, every piece of information that you get is not valuable. It has to be prioritized. So if you get a piece of information, it depends on what kind of person you are. Are you a tactical CEO? Are you a strategic CEO? Are you somebody that is out there trying to raise money, or are you trying to sell a company, right? So there are just variations in people's lives on which sort of pieces of data you need to look at. But I think it also boils down to the individual. Some people, in my career, when I was in corporate America, one of the CEOs, I worked for a very large company. He used to do drill downs. And this is a very large company. He would actually do drill downs in sales meetings down to the sales associate. And he had, lots of salespeople, right? Big data warehousing company. And he wanted to know. I, on the other hand, when I was running a large patch in a large corporate setting, I wanted to know the $100 million transactions above, right? Because the rest of it was not important to me. So the question is really important to understand that what kind of individual you're dealing with on the other side. So how do you figure out what is noise, what is to be retained, and what is to be then discarded, right? I think a lot of it comes down to priorities that you set by the quarter, by the year, or by the strategic plan. And once you understand what that is, then you pick out those pieces of information that need to be triangulated. And data constantly needs to be triangulated. That's the other thing that people forget. They think about dashboards and they think about that, okay, I've got a meter up here telling me something, and I've got something telling me something. It has to be triangulated, right? I mean, there's a lot of good business sense that comes from experience and from learning. And so that can't be left out of the equation of figuring out which data is useful to me or not.
That's really good.
I mean, data is like your bloodstream, right? You got to constantly check what's going on in your blood, right? I mean, you get a lot of high blood pressure because if you don't check what's going on.
So Desh, we work with frequently, in the arena of culture, and we work with oftentimes the Denison Culture Organization and their model. And one of the reasons we chose that is because they have probably the most data on 48 questions asked over and over and over again, and 12 traits that they view as very important to a healthy, sustainable culture, right? But within that data, and at one time, I think people didn't even relate data to culture, right? So you're impacting the culture of these organizations, helping these CEOs, and we were just talking about selection. Can you say any more about that? And the other tie into that for me is, it seems as if since the pandemic occurred, that data that you might count on a week ago may have rapidly changed the next week. So and we talk to our clients about short cycle strategic planning, because annuals, forget about it. Quarterly at times is even a stretch. So I'd love to hear, your thoughts on how you're helping these leaders, these CEOs, whether it be from a cultural perspective or that strategic. I'm the one responsible for trends. I'm the one responsible for performance, of my people, retention, all of those tie together.
Yeah, it's a very broad and tough question when you talk about culture and sort of, measuring culture by data points, right? But you can do this. I mean, the point is, first of all, to get a good sense or benchmark our current culture and what do you really want out of your teams, right? What are you driving for, right? Is it value? Is it revenue? Is it retention of customers? What is more important? Do you value your employees more than you value your revenue? Tough ones. These are all tough questions, right? But in leadership positions, that's what we get paid for, to make those decisions, right?
Yes.
What do I value more? Do I value a high-paying customer that is driving my people nuts? or do I value my people more than I value that revenue, right? So we have,
Great example.
all of us have been at this crossroads, right? And you kind of look at it and you have to make decisions. So my conversation, people, around culture is, culture gets set from the top. There is no shortcut. There's no other answer to that. Is I don't care what anybody tells you. As a CEO of a company, as a leader of an enterprise, I set the culture and the tone of my company. How we deal with our people, how we deal with our customers, how we deal with problems, how we deal with everything going on, right? And so the point that you were making earlier, post-pandemic and pre-pandemic, right? I don't disagree that the pandemic has been so disruptive to everything, especially, people of my generation, in the sense that, we were used to a certain amount of status quo in the way that we worked. And now we look at it and say, oh my God, do I even understand the millennials that surround me, and forget the generation after that, right? But the truth of the matter is, a lot hasn't changed. What has happened is all companies have now had to wake up and say that the people that are in my organization, they're not cogs. They are actual human beings that are thinking, feeling people, right? And I better learn to respect that in my enterprise, right? And if I don't learn to respect that, I think I'm running a factory, and that factory is shutting down, and I just don't know it is shutting down, right? Because we talk about human capital, and we really don't give proper respect to that, right? We think that it's that minion conversation, right? I'm paying you a salary, I'm paying you wages, and therefore, I don't think that has ever worked. We have got away with that because we have, spiked stock prices, done buybacks and stuff like that, but it has not worked. So the question comes up is that what has changed, right? What has changed that we have become a lot more self-aware as leaders, that we really need to think about the culture and the tone of what we're setting today. And the generation that is now in front of us is looking at us and saying that I don't want another Cadillac. I mean, I don't know who wants a Cadillac anymore, but I don't want another, it's a question of, geez, I'm done with that, and so, well, that has been true before too. We just did not pay enough attention to it because we could replace people. Now it's like, nah, you better retain the good people that you have and work hard to make some of the people that are the borderline really star performers, because it's going to be hard to, just keep switching people. The cost is extremely high. So our attitude again is data driven, right? Because we are sort of a data company. And so we look at it and say that, okay, how do I have a scoring model that tells me that this kind of person is really a cool person to have, and how do I attract more cool people like that, right? Some of it is gut driven and some of it is data driven, right? If you're able to blend both of those, I mean, you're in a tremendously advantageous situation, right? I hope that answered that, Leb.
That's great.
Oh, that was great. No, that was great. It makes my heart sing some to distinguish a cog from a person. And it reminds me when the pandemic did start, is how many times we had to help CEOs not write a fearful letter, basically saying, okay, I can't see you. You're not going to be in the office, so you better get on that computer at 8 o'clock, and we're going to track how long you're on, regardless of whether you have a dog and 5 kids or what, and you're going to, you better stay on till 5 o'clock, and all that fearful stuff, because they were truly afraid.
Yeah.
On the other hand, what really mattered was a message of how much we care about your safety, how much we care about each other, how difficult it may be, how varying the landscape may be for those who work at home, and how can we help you?
I'll give you a classic example. This is the time when we were building out a product that we are now releasing in the marketplace. We conducted a survey of a large law firm in New York. This is in the early dev stage of this particular product. It's called Metolius. Metolius, by the way, is named after a river in Oregon. We are an Oregon company. I just want everybody to know that. It's kind of cool to be here. They were trying to understand the impact of work from home, productivity, and revenue. And they were just trying to understand that, right? And there were so many factors that went after that. One of the interesting things that you talked about, Lev, is that through the analysis work that we did, which was very, very rapid, right? We found out that one of the things that the employees were really, they hated, but they had no solution to, in New York City, sitting in their dining room chairs for 8 to 12 hours and actually working. Dining room chairs are not designed, for you to sit down and do office work. The ergonomics are just not there. So part of the ergonomic study that we did allowed us to quickly tell them that the problem is not as big as you think. Open up the office for a day, let them grab their chairs, or just send them the money to go buy chairs. Make it easy for your people, right? And it was shocking what that did on morale and productivity. So the question comes up is that, are we smart enough to look at those components of data, or the data sets, or the minute little parts of data, to do that analysis, is to find out what is it that is really the issue? What is the root cause? We're not talking of statistical analysis, 25% like yellow and 30% like blue. It's a question of why do they like blue and why do they like, and that is the challenge that we have in front of us in trying to understand this data. We got to poke it hard. If you don't poke the data hard, the data is not going to tell you the story.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
No, so Desh, that reminds me of something that I've heard you say before. You say that businesses have to spend more time with the data before they move into analysis. What does that mean? What are some of the do's and the don'ts? How do you know that you're spending enough time with the data? How do you know that you're rushing too quickly into analysis?
Yeah, so the earlier part of the conversation about noise in the data, right? So, I think all of us have had that experience of death by PowerPoint.
Yes.
When somebody comes to sell you something and 30 slides later, you're still trying to understand, why am I in this conference room, right? Or engineering, or somebody is like, Jesus Christ, get to the point, right? I mean, what are you trying to tell me, right? The same thing is with data. Data has this great innate ability to give you highlights, right, very quickly, if you know what you're looking for, right? And most people know what they're looking for. They just don't know how to verbalize that when it comes down to data, right? So I always tell people, it's not as complex as we make it out to be. You have to know what you're looking for in the first place. You don't start a discovery journey and say, I'll land up on that shore and I'll name it something. Those days are gone. The question is that, okay, what am I really trying to find here? And sometimes that is not a one data point question. Sometimes it's a cumulative data point question, right? What am I trying to understand here, right? So if you are looking at your data, and I've got this gobs of data, for example, I'm trying to build a product. And I'm trying to build a product that is a physical product. And I want to build this physical product that I want to ship on Amazon in a shoebox size, right? And so I'm not trying to understand that, and the product needs to fold out to be something that can sit on top of a coffee table, right? So we already said certain things: shoebox size, coffee table, fold out, Amazon. So we got data points, right? So now we talk about weight of the product, which tells us exactly what kind of materials I should be using. We talked about something that fold out, which means there's an engineering design that tells me it has, I'm going to use the word loosely, wings that fold in and out, right? So those are all data points, but at least I have articulated this point in time as to what is it that I want, right? Then I look at my data, and I'm a factory, right? And I look at it and I say, I have no materials that are malleable. I can't fabricate stuff in my factory that can be bent over and folded over, because I don't have the tools, don't understand that material design problem that is there, right? And so then the question comes up is that, geez, I've got another piece of variable outlier out here that I have no understanding of, right? So then it leads you to that question of saying that, okay, I know these other things that I can do, but I just don't know this one part. So you begin to analyze the data with this one part that you don't know, you're going to get skewed results. If you bring in somebody who's a consultant on material sciences, that person can tell you that, let me look at your factory. This is what you got. Let me show you something that you might not have thought about, right? And then all of a sudden, that window of thought opens out. Right? The value of data is that it really makes you think, right? If you're a thinking person, it aids to that conversation. But to begin with that, that answer to your question very specifically is that, how much time do you spend? If you're the kind of person that is, let's say, is a creative, disorganized person, right? And you're trying to find that paintbrush that you're looking for, right? It's going to be a little bit of work unless you remember exactly where you put it. But if you're highly organized as an individual, right, and you can think about it and say, let's say a linear thinker, right? And you can series point that out in that manner. You can pick up the data points that you want and quickly add it. Now, not to say that you're artistic, you can't do the same thing. You just have other data points. But you have to understand with the right tools is that what is important to me and what is not important to me, because you have to know the end result first.
So when you're working with CEOs and they really don't know how to assess what they're really looking for, what they want, how do you help them in that? You mentioned the word a few minutes ago, discovery process.
So, so I'm going to sort of go back to my experience and then again, this application or this product that we built, right? So in my experience, what it is that when we look at every one of us is different. Each one of us processes information differently, right? So I think that first question that one has to ask the person across the desk or across the screen today, what sort of drives that person? What is that makeup of that individual, right? And that some of it you can pick up in conversation, some of it you can pick up in reading and what the company does, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of it is this dialogue, this discussion that we have, right? Now imagine that if you were able to interlay a data collection mechanism, right? A data collection mechanism, and that was already pre-designed to tell you something about that individual's decision-making capability, how that person makes decisions, right? And you sent this assessment to this individual and said that, hey, Patsy, I'm coming to meet you on next week on Thursday. We're going to have a call. Would you take 15 minutes and just walk through this assessment with, just do it by yourself. And, I'll talk to you about it when we meet, right? And if that assessment was smart enough, right, to give you this analysis that you're looking for to understand how that decision-making, how that person makes decisions, right? Okay. Then you're not fighting an uphill battle. And imagine that we meet for the first time and, people have this favorite question they ask, what keeps you awake at night? I mean, I got gremlins that come from all over. I run a company, for God's sake, in, post-pandemic. I mean, what do you want to know about my life, right? But if you were to have that 1 hour conversation with me and say that, Desh, I looked at all of this, right? You have 5 things that are really critical to you in your decision-making cycle. I can probably walk you through 1 and 2 right now, right? And I can help you through that. And I'm going to get Leb, who is my colleague, who's going to come and walk you through 3 and 4 and 5 once we're done with 1 and 2, right? But you're not going to get to 3, 4, and 5 until we get past 1 and 2. That process of assessment is, again, data-driven, right? We take emotional IQ and all those different emotional intelligence IQ and stuff like that. We kind of move it into these data models and produce instantaneous analysis, right? That helps people even look at themselves. Like when we do assessments, we've done all different kind of assessments about in culture and all the kind of stuff, the Myers-Briggs and stuff like that, right? I mean, it did give us indicators, right? Now we can actually drive those indicators down to actual criteria. And the science is advanced, algorithms, mathematics is advanced, right? So we can actually do that very, very quickly. That's one of the ways that I've done it. Is I am sort of, again, I use this term data-driven. I mean, I love data, so I live it. So I can always talk about it and say that this is what the data is telling me. Right now, if the data is wrong, you need to tell me that, right? But this is what the data is telling me.
Yeah. Wow.
It at least provides a starting point or a platform that you can then have a dialogue from, as opposed to making all these assumptions and, through your own lens. That's what I'm liking about what you're talking about.
Yeah. Metolius was really built for the business user, right? It wasn't built for the data scientist. The challenge that we have today is that when we collect a lot of data, how we collect it, right? We collect that data, we export the data, we transform that data, that whole, ETL process that some of us in the old generation had worked with, right? Then you throw it into another set of tools that you begin to analyze. And to Leb's point, time is now compressed. If you're waiting 3 weeks, 3 months for somebody to do the analysis and come back, the world has changed right in front of you, right? So if I can provide you with instant creative analysis, right, that is also creates benchmarks on the fly, right? You know that, okay, if in my consulting practice, if I'm taking Desh from point A to point B, I want Desh to know he's gone from point A to point B because I have data metrics to show him that he's made that progress, right? And that could be a division in a company. It could be 2 companies versus, I'm in the aerospace industry and I'm comparing myself, Boeing and somebody else, right? And I'm trying to understand the culture, right? And those are some of the problems actually that we have worked with in iBridge that has given us this understanding of how to address some of these problems for smaller companies and very cost effectively.
Mm-hmm. So I'm reminded, in Sunday's New York Times, in the business section, there was a really interesting article about Jack Welch that was kind of a myth buster article. I don't know if you happen to catch that.
No, I did not, but yeah, I had the privilege of meeting Jack once. Yeah.
Okay. So, one of the things that it leads me to is, how do you work with or avoid manipulation of data? Because you do know what point you want to make or what direction you want to go. And, I'm thinking of kind of the ladder of inference, where if somebody has a belief, they are selecting the data that supports that belief, right? And so they can literally manipulate, and we've seen this. We've seen this recently with the media and this Russian-Ukrainian conflict, to the point that people are actually believing data that perhaps doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, right? Because we've seen this happening. We know what's happening. It does happen. We know how powerful beliefs are, and that we get to select from the data. How does that play into, in getting the right information? Maybe is a simple way to say it.
So welcome to the world of AI, right?
Okay.
When we look at artificial intelligence, we look at all the different tools and tricks and traps in AI, right? And as AI is becoming more, it's just sort of becoming part of our life. And the best example that you gave us is the media, right? Algorithms drive behavior today, which is very, very sad, right? If algorithms are driving behavior, I mean, that is awful that we have become more of that droid sort of human. We have sort of lost our personality, the ability to distinguish between bad and good, because we only are reinforced with what we constantly want to see, right? That is true in business too, by the way. I have these conversations with my teams, and I always alert them to the fact that I am sort of the guy that sees the glass half full, right? So sometimes I've got to be reminded, it's the wrong glass, it's the wrong full. This is not exactly what we are talking about here. You don't understand why, so it is like, okay, level setting, right? So we've got to understand at that point in time is look at it and say, okay, I have my innate intelligence, right? I have my learning that is there. I am a human being, right? Technology is there to aid me, right? Information is there to support the decisions I want to make, but it are not the decisions that I have to make, right? So the question comes up is when I'm looking at this information, right? And there's such a tangent that we can go off on this way we've come as a country and our inability to distinguish in the concept of critical thinking and thinking in itself, right? We are forced to action, and we act on stuff that we don't even understand, right? Just, and our emotions, sort of become the drivers of all these decisions. The question that one has to always ask ourselves is that for example, this goes back, I used to have a lot of fun 5-6 years ago. People who send me stuff to read, right, and say, look at this, it completely goes against what you just talked about, when we're talking about culture. And I say, okay, have you Googled the author? The author is just as nuts as the article, man. Have you figured out where is that author coming from, right? It just takes 2 steps. Thank God for Google. It's like, geez, I know everything I want to know about everybody, right? And so you look at that and say, okay, that is a position of that person who has this kind of mental makeup, right? Not a mental case, but a mental makeup, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there may be nuggets in there that I have just not seen before. I have not thought about because it's so far off, from the center, right? It's the same thing with data. You're looking at the data and you're looking at it saying, you're seeing an outlier, right? If you're looking at an outlier, you look at it and you say that, is the data skewed? And a great example of that, a practical example, I'll tell you, we were involved with a pharmaceutical company, a large pharmaceutical company, that was buying data from all the labs in the country, right? I mean, they were doing something in drug discovery and something to do with A1C counts in diabetic medicine and stuff like that, which I have no understanding of. And they kept telling us there's something wrong in this data set, right? And we can't seem to figure it out, right? There's something wrong, but we know the data is wrong because it is skewing the model, right? And I mean, they were not that they couldn't have done it themselves, but we were lucky we got called in and we started looking at the data, and the data was actually skewed. And the reason that it is skewed because one part of the country, the people that, I forget exactly the term, that people do all the blood work and stuff like that, right? It's a big word up there, but those that technical group of people were not putting in the demographic information that they were supposed to collect specifically, right? So they would choose the drop down as 45 to 55. Well, that doesn't tell anything when you're looking. You want to go specifically between 42 or 46 to 47. I want to segment my data in that manner, right? And so they had these big globs of data that came in, and they were trying to figure out. And there's a large population in that part of the country. And it was skewing the data models, right? So as soon as we were able to tell them that just disregard this data set, everything began to fall into place. Same thing with everything that we talked about, right? You sometimes have to just disregard a data set, fall back a little bit to your instincts, right? But don't skew the data model because it helps you.
Yeah.
Right. Smart people know how to do that. They know when they're wrong. They just don't want to admit it.
I'm capturing that note for our Let's Get Practical later. Desh, one of the roles of a CEO is to pay attention to trends. What's coming? I think about like the metaverse or advances in cloud computing. What are some of the trends? You're on the cutting edge. You're on the front lines. What are some of the trends that a CEO, either it's already here and you better have paid attention, or else you're going to get swallowed whole, or what's coming that they need to be thinking about today?
So I'll tell you, the life that I have led that has brought me here is customers. Listen to your customers.
Okay.
Right? They are there. You can't. We are not big enough or smart enough to sort of build a whole category, a whole different market for ourselves. We leave it for other people, and then we sort of fill the gaps right behind them, right? So what we have to do is listen to our customers, right? And the problem with most CEOs that I have met that run fairly large companies is they don't have the time to listen to the customers. The customers they listen to just look exactly like them, right? And so the problem with that, and when I say look like them, I'm not doing a race and makeup, I'm just talking about the size of companies. Lockheed talks to Boeing, Boeing talks to Lockheed, everybody has a love fest, right? The problem is that there's a whole industry below that, right? And when you look at all of that goes on in the marketplace, right? You have to spend time in understanding your customers. The second thing is technology, as I tell people, is just an aid to business. It is a way to get from point A to point B. Certain kinds of technology get you there faster. Certain pieces of technology get you there slower, right? And again, everybody wants to get there faster, but you got to look at the company culture. And you look at it and say that, hey, will my culture absorb this piece of technology that's coming? Which leads us to try and understand is what technology is coming our way, right? We keep talking about that. Machine-driven decisions are going to get more and more common, right? We just hired, I know there's a group, I don't know how big they are, maybe about 100 people in one of our divisions of the company. And this guy was telling me, I said, talk to me about this group of people. And they did not have any ability for mouse control. There's a generation of people that are touchscreen people, right?
Oh, right.
And they were like, what do you mean? What is this device? What do it's like, why do you want me to use that? You're going to slow me down, right? And so we have to understand that the generation that is falling in front of us, right, they are very, very different. And so either we are building companies for people like me, or we're building for a generation that is a very different generation, right? And we better be building for a very different generation because we are the past. So the question comes up is that how do we maintain relevance, right? And how do we look for trends? And that conversation comes back to the simple fact is how effective I am in motivating my people to look for trends, because I'm not going to find all the trends myself. And how open am I to listening to those trends? And so it is a combination, again, that goes back to the culture of the enterprise, right? I mean, I've sort of told my people, I said that our life is, one is the customer, the other one is the people, and the third one is the government. And I'll tell you what those are fundamentally. And they're no particular order. The government will always extract what it needs to extract. So pay your darn taxes. You don't want to wrangle with the Internal Revenue Service in whichever country that you're operating in. Some of them are brutal, right? So pay your taxes before you say, oh man, we are profitable, right? So that's one thing. People forget that all the time. And you hear about these numbers, these glory numbers, and I say, okay, so let's peg that down off the taxes, right? Okay, so, and then you get the real numbers, right? The other one is your people. You have to pay attention to your people. And your people need to know that you are really running a round table most of the time, right? You're not really sitting at the head of the table, dictating what needs to get done. I mean, you have already lost your company by that time. It's too late.
I love that visual. Right? Because I just wrote about this the other day, just briefly. I think back to a company that I was working at a number of years ago, a series of missteps, and the market bottomed out for us, and we just fell behind. And before you know it, we were bleeding cash, and there were layoffs, and they got rid of the cleaning crew. So we all had to, there was a big bin out in the middle of the hallway. We all had to empty our trash at the end. I know, first world problems, but it was just, we hadn't had to do that before. And they came in one weekend and they removed half the light bulbs from the building because they were trying to cut the energy cost. I mean, it was like real serious, dire, like this is what we had to do to survive. There were changes everywhere except in the CEO office. And when you walked by the CEO corner office, there was this expensive, oversized antique furniture, and nothing about that office changed. And it just became more and more of an outlier. It's kind of like you say, it wasn't a round table at all. There, it was we're doing now in hindsight, he may have been locked in that office, head down, trying to figure out how to pull us out of this, the weight of the world on his shoulders. I don't know, but the appearance was we were kind of bearing the brunt of all of this, and there was no change whatsoever. He wasn't there much longer. So when you say you've already lost the company, if you don't have that visual, I just love that visual. I think that was great.
No, we operate in multiple countries, right? And I happen to go visit our offices, and I'm starting again. I don't have an office I don't even go to my office, actually, honest to God, because, it is disruptive, right? You walk into those offices and you walk in there every day, it's one thing, right? But if you just walk in, you're flying from the US and you're flying into Canada or something, and it's like, okay, the guy is here, right? It is disruptive to a degree, but I just use a hotel cube. I don't care. There's nothing that I do in my life that is so important that I need an 8-foot by 8-foot desk kind of thing, right? And separate my people from me, right? I want to be able to listen, talk, and understand what's going on. And the best way to do that is to be one of the crowd, right?
Yeah.
I think there's certain things you're not going to do in a hotel queue, but the normal stuff, responding to emails, and you could certainly do that. If your company is that crazy that everything has to be confidential, you're in trouble.
Yeah. So, and we're tiptoeing now into another side of your experience that I want to ask about, because up to this point, you've been Desh Urs, the data expert, to helping our listener figure out how to make better data-driven decisions and see data as a strategic asset. You are also Desh Urs, CEO. So you know what it's like to lead. You know what it's like to try to engage employees, and to your point, globally, employees all over the world. So how do you, and maybe some of it's rehashing points you made earlier, but how do you create a great culture? If, as you said earlier, culture emanates from the top, it starts with you. How do you make sure that you're creating a great culture for iBridge?
It is tough. And it is really tough. And I tell you why it is tough now for us is because we are growing rapidly, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about revenue curves and all this kind of good stuff. It's just number of people that are coming in. when you add, when you start off and you're 100 people, 50 people, etc., it's very manageable, right? And especially if you're in one culture in one country, it is still, I mean, the US is so diverse as a nation, but we still are pretty tight in our behavior, culture, acceptance of what's, right or wrong, right? You start throwing this into a mix of 500 people, you're hiring 300 people at a time, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then you have the pandemic, and 50% of one team is decimated, and you're bringing in, it's very, very numbing to some extent, because you have to go back and rework this every day of your life. Earlier this morning, I was talking to our digital marketing team, a bunch of new hires, right? And we were just talking about the company culture, and I was talking to them about integration into an organization that they are in the same city, but they don't want to operate within the norms of that organization. And I was explaining to them there's something called functional integration and organizational integration, right? We are not functionally trying to change your life. You are already good at what you do. We're not trying to micromanage you, but we're trying to organizationally bring you into the company culture. So you understand that you can lean on us. You understand that we are there to help you. We are not there to, dictate what we want. You're already an expert, right? We don't hire people and then judge them later, right? I mean, my attitude is, why would you apply for a job that you can't excel at? I mean, it's a stupid idea, right? And so the question is that we go with that same principle, and people come in and they're very good. I mean, we have been blessed by incredible employees, right? And the ones that don't make it are out. But the ones that are there, you got to constantly go back to them and say that, understand why you are here, and understand why we are here, and who are we? 10 years ago, we were one kind of company. 10 years later, we are a different company. Understand where we are going 10 years from now, because you're going to inherit this. I am not. This is for you that I'm doing this now. It's not for me. You know what I mean? I'm okay, right? So if we don't do this together, you're going to build a lousy organization by the time you're 40 and 50. And do you want to really live in that? I wouldn't want to do that.
Right.
So it's really handing them the baton and saying, you got to figure this out along with me, because, you're just as smart as I am.
Wow.
Yep.
But you got to drive that. That is the one thing that even in our company, one of the things I said, for the next 2 years, we are going to be spending this time in really looking at some of our practices that fall within the world of human capital, human management, and HR and stuff like that, and try and understand it, because I think there's a lot of room for improvement. All of us have a lot of room for improvement.
Desh, you're making me think of onboarding. And I don't know exactly even where to go with data around onboarding, but I know that the companies that onboard effectively have people who stay and are productive more quickly, and they stay longer.
Yep. Onboard, there's another word that I've been hearing a lot about: induction and onboarding, right? And people kind of use that separately. And I heard that recently in my own company. And, most companies do a decent job of onboarding, right? I mean, most companies, there are practices, and hopefully most people do that, right? Because, the first 7, people say 7 days, 30 days, whatever, the employees made up their mind, but this is a place I'm going to be at. Am I going to be here and, fill my time and then get my resume out again, right? It is not the benefits. It's just that human interaction, how I greet you, how I work with you. But the other one that we constantly forget, and I think that's part of induction, I'm not sure, but it is the integration.
Yes.
That integration into the team, right? And integration in, is just so critical, right? I mean, one of my colleagues years ago, when we were doing crazy things together, would always say this, I want to know how much I'm going to get paid. I want to know who I'm reporting to. I want to know what my job is, right? Some of that is true today, but not all of it, right? How much I'm going to get paid is not the issue today. I mean, that's fine. The issue is that, okay, who am I reporting to? That is sometimes not very clear. Right? Functional reporting is one thing. Organization reporting is another thing, right? I mean, so you're reporting 2 or 3 different people today, right?
Correct.
And then, the question is that, how am I being measured, kind of thing, right? I mean, that is where companies fall on their face horribly. They cannot tell an employee what is going to make them successful at the job that they do. and how they're being measured. And that's complex work.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's even more complex, right? When I think of integration, it's what you said, and I would add, it's integrating them into the company family, right? Into the relationships that are bigger than just the work that I do, and that's more complicated today when in a hybrid environment. It's more complicated. There are employees that are even in if they're not going into a lot of companies have either gone fully virtual or hybrid. Even in a hybrid model, you might still go into the office occasionally, but not every employee is going back on the same day. So there's some going 20% here, 20% there.
Mm-hmm.
So you may never meet in physical proximity. You may never meet all the people on your team. And so how do you, it's a challenge. It's more of a rhetorical question. It's about being cognizant of how do you build those relationships.
Actually, in my meetings, what I do now, right? I mean, the thought occurred to me recently, so it's not like I've been practicing this all my life. But, if I set up, we normally don't have 1 hour meetings at the company unless it's really serious, but so generally the 30-minute meetings. And I will start off, and I don't go back to back in my meetings. I give myself some time. Most of the days I can afford to do that. So I'll start off the meeting like 5 minutes early, right? And people will join in. And that's the empathy conversation. I want to know what's going on in your life. So how did your grandchild or your kid, or remember you talked about this the last time, right? That first 5-10 minutes. So I don't have an agenda for 30 minutes. I always have an agenda of 15 minutes because I need to let people talk about what they need to talk about, right? And so, you control it in ways, right? But you let them express because they are talking about stuff that matters to them, right?
Yep.
And if you don't give them that space to just talk, right? It's all about business. It is not, it's just tough. As human beings, we need that. Why do we need a hug, right? I can't hug you across the screen, right? But I can at least give you that time of day where you can talk about stuff that matters to you and your family and, whatever's going on in your life. And we share. Sharing is a human experience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And make good notes because you got to come back to that guy that you don't remember his last name that is on your meeting. And you go ask him about his little terrier that had to go to whatever, right? So those are the little things that make differences in somebody's life.
Yeah, mindfulness and intentionality. You're right. To me, that when you follow up in that next conversation and you ask a question that is a follow-up to what they shared the first time, it shows you were listening.
Yeah.
It seems so basic. It is,
yeah,
but it's basic, but it's very impactful.
Yeah.
So
business is all about people, so if you understand that, it's not about the product that you make it's all about people, right? People, we hear this, people buy from people, etc. Which is very, very true. And so, if you're comfortable with me, you'll do business with me. And how do you know you're comfortable with me, right? There's certain things that I'm saying, certain things that you sense in my behavior. And then you manipulate that in your mind and you realize that, okay, I'm this person. It goes back to the same data-driven decisions because your mind is kind of assimilating the data points and saying, this guy dresses like a nut. He must be a nut. Whatever it is. So it's like, he may be Einstein for all I know, but, I don't have time. It's a bad decision, but it's there, right? So.
That's great.
I love what we're talking about. When I was recently in this Denison Culture Forum for a couple of days, for about 20 years, they've always talked about if I had to boil the ocean around culture, I would be looking for clarity and alignment. Now they said clarity and alignment still matter. And now what really matters is listening and intimacy.
That is so true.
Yeah. And I think that's what you were talking about, is that 5 or 10 minutes, whatever it is, where someone can bring something up or either an update or something new that really is close to them or brings you closer together or, and just listening.
SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Managers, they conduct a survey called the Empathy Index, right? It is, we just have to listen as leaders a lot more.
Yeah.
We just have to learn to listen. That 2 years in one mouth kind of expression we heard all our life. We just need to get our ears working a lot more, and listen, and don't rush to judgment and tell people what to do. You hired good people, for God's sake. They know more about you, about their part of the business than you know. Right? I had a boss that used to tell me, if I ever know more about your business, I'm going to fire you. Never forgot that. Right? And he says, if I call for a meeting, I don't care where you live, which country you're in. If I call for a meeting, you show up. Never forgot those two things, right? But it is so true. But you've got to learn to listen. And empathy is not faked, right? Either I care or I don't care. And if you are faking it, then get to a good therapist and figure out how to care.
Yeah.
Because
that's awesome. Here's what I love about this, right? So if my natural inclination is not empathy, or if I haven't been listening, or if I know there are still leaders out there that think that's not business stuff, that's fluffy, that's like, I don't want to do that, or I don't need to do that. And yet what you're talking about is absolutely data-driven decisions. It's about using data as a strategic asset. How? By listening, right? So it's not just the data that's coming through your data repository. It's also the data that's coming from the mouths of your employees. It's data that's coming from the mouths of your customers. It's like the data is everywhere. Mm-hmm. And if I'm only focused on the data that's in my Excel spreadsheet, and I'm missing all of the data and not mining that data and looking for the connecting the data points into information about what's going on in my culture. How are my people feeling? How do I need to show up differently to meet them where they are? That's data. Like everything you're talking about to me, it all comes back to helping a CEO or a leader make better data-driven decisions.
You look at our warfighters, right? You look at all our warfighters, you look at the SEAL team and things like that. It's a brotherhood, right? Mm-hmm. It is not about the individual. And I don't know why we believe that we are so smart because we have these titles or founders and CEOs, et cetera, right? That we think we know everything and the team is there to support no, there's no my in this, right? Yeah. It is, we have a joint mission. What is a mission objective, right? And the only way that you can do that is if you can lean on the person ahead of you, behind you, side of you, and that they're covering for you all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that, we talk about noise, we talk about all of this stuff and data, et cetera, right? You look at this all the time and you say that, okay, I am who I am. I have certain faults that I need to accept as faults. And how do I improve on that, right? And that decision comes from, the conversation about whether it is data, whether it's empathy-driven data, it is whatever that is, right? But it is the ability that you said is just being true to oneself and saying that, this is something that I need to learn. This is what I need to listen. And this is how I'm going to get better.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I have one more question around sports and data. So I'm kind of a sports junkie, right? And it's always so fascinating to me how much data goes into who's going to be like the number one pick in a particular sport, and how often that pick actually doesn't turn out to be the sports, giant that they thought that person was going to be. Maybe this is about balancing data in your gut, but I think it just fascinates me, that even as I used to coach basketball. Even as a coach, you could say, "Oh well, right now, Dallas Mavericks in this situation, they run this play 45% of the time. So let's be ready for this play." And then they do another play, and you're all thrown off. And is there a way to correlate that either to the business, or have you gotten involved in any of the sports side of data?
Not on the sports side of data from the aspect that you're talking about, but because we live in Oregon and because Nike is right here, and if you ever have the privilege of going to one of their labs and you look at how they measure athletes, every movement, every sub-second, and how they do stuff. It is just mind blowing, right? The science that goes behind that and the engineering that goes behind all of that. It is like machine trading on the stock market, right? It's sub-second information that is there, right? I mean, you look at all of that and you try and understand that as a human being that doesn't have the labs of Nike or the labs of IBM or whoever today, right? Or the stock market information that comes to me all the time, and I'm managing all of that, right? The question is that there are so many curveballs that are thrown at us, right? Every day. You begin your day with an understanding that I have these 3 things I'm going to get done and blah, blah, blah. And you open up your email and there's something that says, okay, this is over. This, I'm going to have to pay attention to this one here, right? Okay. Right. And in today's world, the worst thing that you can get is a resignation of a key employee, right? I mean, that's it. The whole world falls apart. Truth of the matter is the companies would survive, right? I mean, there's not one key employee that is not replaceable. I hate to say that in the way that I said it, but companies continue because of culture, because of everything else, right? Mm-hmm. But the piece is that, the variables in data that we see constantly, either we build that into the equation or we choose to disregard it as part of that equation. That talks about internal bias.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Internal bias tells me that, okay, that I am going to disregard that because I like the Dallas Mavericks, and they are going to, we have these little things in our head that play tricks with us, right? And I think that is where, if you have machine-aided decision-making, right, that you can put this data into, and you can look at unbiased opinions of what comes out of it, then you can overlay your sense of feeling, emotion, etc., and your other human qualities that we have, to look at that and say that, okay, I know this is what it's telling me, but I'm going to change. I'm going to take a different direction because, and you need to answer that because.
Oh, that's great.
Right?
Yes.
And just don't tell yourself that. Talk to somebody that you trust in the company and say, I just want you to know that, and I'm by the way, it happens to me quite often nowadays because we are in a fast moving product mode in some of our stuff. And so, I'll come up with stuff and the guys will tell me, Desh, you can make that call, but we just want you to inform you that this is what we are thinking of doing. And I'll look at them and I'll say, humor me, right? Let's just go this direction for a little bit. Just humor me along this way, right? Mm-hmm. There's something telling me that we are missing something here. Let's go figure this one out before we decide on the course of action, right? And if your team is, if your team is one of those people that you sort of are colleagues, they will humor you. Sometimes they'll ask you to, take that giant leap of faith and go the direction that they're telling you, and you just have to let go of your ego at that point in time and say that that's a really cool decision.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really good.
Patsy, any more questions before we jump into Let's Get Practical?
I could easily go another hour, so I think I'll stop right now. We're so many fascinating, relevant topics here.
You said one more question, but anything else?
I gave it.
Yes. Good.
I was just dipping a little bit into my sports background.
All right. So if we're ready, then we can move into the Let's Get Practical. This is the part where we try to assemble our list of specific things that a listener can begin to implement in their business, or steps they can take tomorrow to start making inroads in the area of using data as a strategic asset. So Desh, will give you the opportunity to go first. 2 or 3 things that come to mind. If you're a listener, what would you do to take positive steps in the right direction?
So I would pay attention to, if we have a plan, say a strategic plan, right? And we look at the strategic plan and we say that here are the tactical items that came out of the strategic plan. And we are at the beginning of Q3 or Q2 or something like that, right? I would look at that strategic plan and look at my tactical elements that are there that I have to execute on, and look at that and say that what are the key things that I need to focus on, right? The key things that I need to focus on, for example, is hiring. I've got to push a product out of the door. Mm-hmm. I have to make sure that my revenue is stable, right? Say those are the key things that I'm looking at today. Which of these key things are data influenced or data driven? how many of them are going to be sort of less data, more something else, right? So if it's one of these things, for example, the hiring part of it, right? I look at hiring as a data-driven decision because I need to understand. I have this innate sort of seeking habit that I need to try and understand that, the person that I'm bringing on, the function, et cetera, all this kind of good stuff, right? And the ideal profile. If we are looking at that, we say that, okay, how do I organize this, right? And then the part that the CEO, I think, has to do is figure out who in the organization is that I can go to with this specific thought or process and sit down and have a one-on-one with and say that this is how I'm thinking through this, right? This has immediate impact of what we're going to do. Do we have enough information in the company that you have collected that helps me get a clarity of this thought, right? Can you provide me that information, right? If the person doesn't have it, the person will probably say, I don't have it, or let me get that to you, right? If it is stable, say the next thing that I've got a product out of the door, right? Which is much more complicated because there's so many different moving parts up there. And then again, you just look at the data points, but not at the data itself, because there are people in engineering, there are a lot of different parts in marketing, et cetera, that get involved in this stuff. But you're trying to manage and trying to make sure that the picture that you are seeing is an actual picture that's going to get delivered to you. And those links that could break through that process, right? And understanding that. If you're able to do that, and then you look at which is not so much data in my mind, but it's information. It's garnering information, understanding that. The other part is the revenue side of it. That say, I want to just make sure my stable bit goes back to your customers. You've got to know what's in your pipeline, which anybody is worth the salt, knows what's in their pipeline, understands the deal flow and all this kind of good stuff. But you really need to talk to your customers, because if we know anything today, there is so much of people are not sure what's coming at them, right? The rate of inflation, war, instability, human issues. You just got to pick up the phone and talk to people, or get on a call and otherwise video calls, and just talk to people and say that, what are you seeing? Just get a sense.
Good stuff. Patsy, who wants to go?
Go ahead, Len.
All right. Well, I have at least 2 full pages.
Yeah, I do too.
I'll try to sort through them. I put a little star next to the ones I think I might share. Okay. So, one of them is I guess maybe the shortest way to say it is meet your people where they're at. You don't need a crowning office related to your title. So I really like that. I think it's really important. And another is that learn some things about AI. Start to engage yourself in the importance of AI and what it can do for your business, especially if you're in a leadership role. And know what kind of a CEO you are and what you're there for in the lead role. You're a tactical CEO. You mentioned that. You mentioned strategic. You're trying to sell the company. You're trying to grow the company. Are you trying to acquire other organizations? Know the kind of CEO that you are, because it will influence the way you look at and gather data, and that information can be helpful to the company. Another was, understand who we are as a company together, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is not a singular version or definition. If it is, it usually doesn't carry, and it will impact the culture and your ability to attract and retain. So, and the last one I'll say is, I just really love it because it ties into the Denison culture piece around not just clarity and alignment, but listening and intimacy, and that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Patsy, I'll send it to you.
I'll take it. Let's see through my copious notes here. You said work really hard to retain your people. I thought that was so simple and so profound. So blend data and your gut. So there's you have 2 resources to work really hard to retain your people. And another one was, as the CEO, be at a round table, create a round table, be at the round table, so that you're a part of the discussion, not at the head of the table. And then you said there are 3 things that you have to pay attention to. I only wrote 2 down, so I want to make sure we got the third. The government, to pay your taxes, your people, and what was the third one?
Your clients.
Your clients.
Your customers.
Okay. So.
Excellent.
So I'll leave a few nuggets for you, Patrick.
All right. I'll throw out the ones I've starred. Desh, I love it when you said, I mean, very succinctly, the people in your organization aren't cogs. They're human beings. Mm-hmm. And you need to respect that. You need to understand that and think about what that means for your culture. I thought it was very profound. And, we heard this just about a year ago from another one of our guests saying, you better not be building for yourself. You better be building for a different generation. Mm-hmm. Be building for a generation that looks very different from your own. I thought that was profound as well. I love integration is as important as, if not more important than onboarding, which kind of ties with what you said, Lem. The kind of an overall theme, the data coming out of the mouths of your employees is just as important as the data in your databases and the data in your repositories and your spreadsheets. Don't forget about the human data. And then I had one more. Desh, you said your technology is there to aid you. Information is there to support the decisions that you want to make. But don't forget to lean on your own innate intelligence and instincts. And sometimes that means you have to disregard a data set to accomplish that. I thought that was great examples. Anything that we missed? Anything anybody else wants to add? Circle back a second time. Anything like what key takeaways for a CEO?
I'll add one, that it's really critical to ask why when you're looking at the data. And I loved it. You said, and you have to really poke the data hard. Yes. You have to dive into it and explore it, not just take it at face value.
Yeah. That who, what, why, it's really fundamental stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got to learn to ask those questions. And I was talking to somebody on my team today, and I said, that same question, trust but verify, that fundamental adage that we use today is that. But the question is that verification question, depending on who you're asking, you have to frame that question differently all the time with a clear sense of understanding that the data that you're trying to gather, right? It's either validation or it is just opposite of that validation methodology that you're currently using, right? And so you've got to be careful how you ask that question because it can skew your results. So don't ask the same question down the rank and file. People are smart enough not to do that. But you got to think about the questions that you're about to ask.
Very good.
Any more you want to add, Leb?
No, just that, this distinction between noise and usefulness with the data and knowing what you're looking for and how important that is when it comes to oftentimes a tremendous amount of data.
Intention, we constantly call it, what is the intention, right? I mean,
the intention. Okay.
If you figure out what the intention is, it is so easy then, to stack the data in that manner, right? And stack the information in that manner also.
Yeah.
Desh, if one of our listeners is wanting to improve their organization's data decision making, how do you serve that customer? Here's like an opportunity. Give us the overview of iBridge and what you do for a client and why someone should contact you, and then we'll make sure they get your contact information.
Sure. Yeah. So we started in 2004. We were about 1,300 people. Probably we'll end up in the next year with about 2,000 people across 3 different geographies. And what we have built as an enterprise is really a frictionless conversation with people that are trying to figure out a problem statement, right? Forget the fact that with iBridge is the right company to help them to solve that problem. So you have your doors open for people who can talk to you, and you have a conversation peer to peer, and you talk. And a peer does not have to be another CEO. It could be a product manager of a company. It could be a warehouse manager. It could be anybody, right?
Mhm.
They're just talking to you and saying that, look, I just don't know how to solve this problem. And I think somebody talked to me in the last seminar I went to that I need to build a data warehouse. I need to do that, right? And they just want some reaffirmation of the thinking process or something that they don't know, and they're trying to understand that, right? And it is not a transaction-oriented conversation, iBridge. We just don't do that at all. We are not a transaction-oriented company. We are a relationship-driven company, right? I mean, we have customers that have been there from the day that we started and opened our doors till today. And, I can proudly say we have lost 3 customers in 18 years, and there's stories behind each one of them, but a lot of it has to do also with the way that we chose to run the company. And it is all about the fact that you have this dialogue with somebody. People are smart. They will figure out if you're adding value to what they want to do or you're adding fluff, right? And you have to simplify the conversation. So my objective as a technologist is, I think in this entire conversation, I don't think I used any technology terms, and on purpose, because it doesn't do anything to aid the discussion, right? Mm-hmm. The question is that you got to look at the other person and say that, okay, let me understand what is it that you're trying to solve. That problem statement is something that people ignore a lot, right? And you have to dig down to really figure out what that problem is, because a stated problem may not be the problem, right? So my thing is that pick up the phone, call me, right? Send me an email. I'm available, right? If I can't respond to you today, I'll respond to you tomorrow. If I'm on a flight, international flight, you'll get a response in 3. I will respond to all the emails. I will pick up the phone and call everybody, right? Even if somebody is trying to sell me something and call me 3 times, I will return that phone call and say, look, you're wasting your time talking to me, because you could talk to somebody that is a good prospect. I'm not a good prospect. I've been a sales guy, so I understand that part, right? So the question comes up is that, hey, I'm here to listen. I'm here to learn, and then we will talk about execution. So listening, learning, executing is what we drill in everybody's head at iBridge. Listen and learn. The customer knows their business. They're just looking for the right solution. Sometimes they have the solution, right? You just have to guide them. And maybe iBridge is not the right company for them to deploy the solution with, right? There are a lot of good people out there. And so the question comes up is, how best can you take care and create value in that person's mind, and they can create value in the company, right? So that is how we have built our entire business. It's, one customer at a time.
Beautiful. How can someone get in touch with you or with iBridge if they want to learn more?
So my email is my first period last name, so Desh.Urs @ibridgellc.com. And my phone number is 503-906-4361. And more than likely, you'll get my voicemail on there, because that's my office number. And just leave a message and I'll respond back to you. But feel free to send me an email. It's really easy, I'm available. And if it's a problem that's beyond my pay grade, there are a lot of smart people in the company who will talk to you. I mean, the entire organization is built in that manner, right? I mean, we are here to help. We've always, survived ups and downs and economies and downturns, etc. But we have maintained that, that thing that we're really, really here to help. I mean, forget that, it's over.
And the website is it iBridge.com?
iBridge, yeah, www.ibridgellc.com. So it's iBridge LLC, right? LLC.com.
So
don't forget
letter I, bridgellc.com. Excellent.
iBridgellc.com. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah.
Excellent. Desh, thank you for being our guest on the Frustrated CEO podcast. This is great. A lot of really good stuff. Hopefully our listener found it as useful, learning how to make better data-driven decisions, easier to listen to than it is to say. Patsy Leb, any final thoughts?
No, thank you, Desh. It's absolutely
very inspiring. Yep.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, this was fun. I hope it's useful for other
Absolutely. Folks. Absolutely. I know that it will be. So thank you again. Thank you, listener. Thanks for sticking with us to the end of another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget that you can download this episode's companion, Let's Get Practical, directly from our website, which is thefrustratedceo.com. And you can follow us on LinkedIn, where So just go into the search bar in LinkedIn and search for the Frustrated CEO podcast. You'll find us, and that way you can see a daily snippet of video vignettes from this episode and all previous and future episodes as well. Thanks so much for sticking with us. We'll see you again next time on the Frustrated CEO podcast.